This is the One Step Better podcast. Helping small businesses make wins each and every week. Hey everybody, we are back. Mike and Matt up here in the One Step Better podcast. Today we're going to continue our series talking about mistakes that business owners commonly make, that at least probably that we've made and that we see other people make. And today that topic is going to be around profit. The reality is a lot of times it's sometimes difficult to understand profit and how we get to profit. And so we're going to look at ways in which you can maybe change some things, adjust some things, look at some things that are going to impact your profit. Everybody cares to some extent about being profitable. If you're running a business, that's the goal, unless maybe you have some special cause, nonprofit type of thing. And so we want to jump into that. So Matt, whenever we talk about profit, let's make sure that we have a very elementary understanding of what we talk about, what we mean when we use the term profit.
Wow, this is accounting 101. You threw me right under the bus. No.
Hopefully you passed accounting 101.
I did my best to cheat my way through it. Profit. Simple things. Sales minus what you sell minus the other expenses that any business would have, less taxes equals profit.
Taxes suck.
Taxes suck.
So when you say sales minus the stuff you sell, what does that mean?
So I'll use the basics of I own a sporting goods store. I sell baseball gloves. I sold a glove for $10, and I need to probably put a lot of zeros on that today. It cost me $2 to buy that glove. That is what you sold, less the telephone bill at the sporting goods store equals profit. Your service-based business, the reality of it is we probably sell our labor or our expertise. So in our world, if we're an accounting firm, we bill a client $100, and we'll just use simple things. The time I incurred or the cost of that employee for the time they worked on that thing was $2. We made $98.
Yep. Yeah. And so when we talk about the thing that we sell having a cost associated with it, back to that accounting 101, we call that the cost of goods sold.
Yep.
Or COGS, C-O-G-S, commonly referred to. And so really when we're talking about profit, we're looking at revenue, the dollars that our customers are paying us, minus the cost that we are incurring to sell or produce that product or service, minus general overhead, all of the other stuff that you have to pay to run a business, and that minus taxes suck, equals profit. So realistically, when we talk about understanding our profit and trying to maximize profit, there's really two big buckets apart from revenue. We'll talk about that a little bit, but two big buckets on controlling cost that we can really manipulate. The first one is all things cost of goods sold. The second one is all things overhead. So everything else, everything not directly related to production of revenue. If you're going to sit down with a business owner, or maybe even look at your own business and try to find ways to squeeze another nickel down to the profit line, the bottom line, where are you going to start in those buckets?
I think of cost of goods sold and I think of overhead a little differently than those terms. And I think of them as fixed cost that regardless if I sell anything or not, I'm going to have a fixed cost. And I have what's called what I think of as a variable cost. If I sell more of this thing, it's going to cost me more to sell that thing. And that's what the logic of it is between the two things. There is always a point at the very beginning that I got to hop over a floor, right? So if I have to pay a telephone bill, regardless of whether or not I have any employees or not, I've got to remember that I have this fixed floor I have to hop over. Now, let's assume we've obviously already hopped over that floor with sales above our fixed cost. Because that's the first things that I want to make sure that our revenue is going to be exceeding our fixed cost.
And what you mean by that realistically is regardless if I have one person in this building or 100 people in this building, I'm going to have a telephone. Therefore, I have to pay that telephone bill.
And I have rent or utilities, or I have to pay for the internet or whatever those things are. So at that point, though, that's a lever that I always want to be sure first that I'm not just wasting money in my fixed costs. But the reality of it is those aren't as impactful, I think, to profitability after you've kind of cleaned up the basics of I'm not wasting money.
You want to make sure I don't have 8 phone bills that I'm paying. I need one phone bill I'm paying.
If you think about your home, this is when you find out you have 9 subscriptions to some streaming service when you only needed to have 4.
I have Hulu and I have Disney Plus. Turns out I have Hulu plus Disney Plus as well.
Correct. That's just wasted money. Now, that's one lever, and that's obviously super important into making sure that you're not wasting money. But truly impacting the lever that I want to make sure I'm pulling is understanding what's going into my cost to sell a product or a cost to sell a service. And so because of that, I quickly start looking at, are we pricing the product appropriately to cover the fixed cost that we know we have, plus the actual cost of acquisition of that product? So in my example of the softball glove, if it costs me $1,000 a month for my telephone bill, and I'm only going to sell 5 softball gloves this month, my cost to sell a softball glove has to be dramatically higher than what I just paid for the softball glove.
Okay, so you just jumped from Accounting 101 to cost accounting.
Yeah, a little bit.
Let me back up just a little bit. So if that's the case, let's assume that that everybody listening is maybe a little bit more established of a business. They have a kind of a floor that they're already jumping over. They're already over that hurdle. And so when it comes to taking some time to evaluate those fixed costs, really what you said is you're not going to spend very much time doing that. You're going to make sure I'm not wasting money, and then you're moving on.
Correct.
You don't think that there's a significant amount of dollars generally to find in that bucket compared to other things.
Once you've looked at it and reviewed those expenses, you'll quickly find that, hey, those don't change my. I may have a service I'm not using anymore. I can kill. I have that kind of stuff, but that's a kind of a. You can do that on a pretty routine basis and doesn't really.
But that may be $100 a month. We're not talking about $10,000 a month.
It depends
generally.
on what you're doing, right? Yeah. On a product business, what people don't realize is they're not ordering, taking advantage of, let's say, appropriate terms to get discount on product, or they're not smart about their ordering, so they're overpaying on freight, or they haven't thought through all the costs of the salesperson to go sell that product, with a commission is on a sale into the pricing of that product. And so there's a lot of factors that go into when I think about the cost to buy that baseball glove or that softball glove, how many things really need to be in that cost before I set my price? If I'm doing a costing type pricing, you'll find, a lot of pricing on product now is not based off of costing though. It's based on what kind of value does that product provide the market. If you're buying an iPhone versus a Samsung phone, an iPhone costs 4 times more. Right. And they haven't priced it based off of the components that went into it. They're basing it off of value. All that being said, though, they still have to know what went into the cost to build that product.
That at least establishes a floor of where I'm going to start from.
Correct. What really, though, actually impacts profit is your ability to know all the things that go into that and what the impact of that will be. So I'll use a restaurant now as an example because it actually makes a lot more sense. So we actually had a client that was selling, this is a funny story, he's selling Red Bull vodkas, right? Simple drink. It has 2 components, and he had a shot of vodka in it, and he had a Red Bull, and it was basically, let's say it's a full can of Red Bull for every shot. And so he did the math there and just added those 2 things together. I said, that's great, except you also paid shipping on that. You also have the value of just because you can price it that way doesn't make, so you want to make sure you're maximizing your profit on a very popular drink. So let's say it cost him $3 to make that drink and he was selling it for $5. Well, then his margins may be great on it, but what's the possibility of that when you think about all the other things that went into that? And, the labor of how long it takes to make the drink, and then how many people you have to make sure you're advertising the drink to get people in the store, all the stuff that goes into it. And I said, well, you have a lot of margin play there. If you look at that drink in the market, it may be $8 or $9. And so you've given up potential if you sell 100 of those a day for $300 or $400 more of profit just because you didn't price something correctly.
So it sounds like really maybe one of the first places that you're going to look whenever we're starting to really drill into how profitable is a business and what is, what's possible there isn't necessarily on the expense side, but it's on the generating revenue. It's the pricing, getting dollars in the door.
So your margins are set with only two levers, right? It's either I can sell this product for more, or I can reduce the cost of the product to sell. And the reality of it is most of the time it's a pricing problem, not a cost problem. You're paying the same, or somewhat relative to the market. If you're buying something from somebody else, if I'm buying a can of Red Bull vodka, they have a pretty fixed cost there when I buy it. I'm not going to dramatically do that. If I buy 4 million of those, maybe I can dramatically impact my price, but how fast can I turn them? What's my cost of storage? All that stuff that goes into it. But if I can really impact my profitability by pricing. Pricing is where I think most small business owners undervalue their services or their product, and they use fear of, well, I won't sell any of this if I don't do this.
I think maybe that's a little bit of the Amazon effect of Amazon is pricing their stuff at really slim margins. If it costs me $1, I'm going to sell it for $1.01 and do that 1 billion times over and make 1 billion pennies.
Yep.
Small businesses aren't doing that, and realistically they can't do that, but there's a little bit of price sensitivity because, especially if I'm selling a widget, that can be bought other places cheaper. Mm-hmm. And so from a pricing strategy philosophy standpoint, you really have to identify who you are and who your buyer is so that you can align, because your messaging changes. If I'm producing a widget and Amazon or whoever, I'm not going to pick on Amazon, sells it for $1.01 and I want to sell it for $2, I got 99 cents of value that I have to be able to communicate to my buyer in a way that is going to compel them to buy. And that's possible. I mean, you used the example of Apple versus Samsung. There is a large difference that a bunch of people are willing to pay, and you can't tell me feature functionality is significantly different.
For perceived value.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think about like a dining experience. You can get a meal with probably similar ingredients, probably with similar results of the plate that you'll receive as far as food, quantity, type of food, and the experience will sell a value. Your job, if you're a landscaper or if you're a accounting firm or if you're a restaurant, is to provide the value for what they're buying. And there's, the experience that the buyer has, how you're communicating. Chick-fil-A sells a sandwich just like McDonald's sells a sandwich, but the experience is much different. They're not even priced dramatically different, but they've worked on efficiencies. They have repeat customers because of how the experience goes.
Got questions about how to run your business better? Join Works and Patrick Accounting for Office Hours. Every month on Thursdays, several of our staff host open discussion Zoom meetings to share tips on business best practices, as well as answer any questions you have about their topic. We talk about QuickBooks tips and tricks, how to understand your insurance policies, employee onboarding, and the list goes on and on and on. Don't miss your opportunity to engage in the conversation and come away with some business tips. Register today at works.com/office hours. That's WHIRKS.com/office hours. Can't wait to see you there.
When you're thinking through your profitability goals, what I often find is our clients typically don't look at the intangibles when it comes to pricing, and they also don't think through all the worst case outcomes that can happen. And so I have a pool service client that we've had for a long time, and we often talk about he's done the math. He always comes back to me about what he says, well, this is what it cost me to clean a pool and to do the work. I said, great. How many days during the whole year do you have a full schedule? So how much time are you paying for dead time or for travel time or for, hey, it's a rain day that we're not going to go clean your pool if it's raining or whatever it may be. And I said, you have a lot of those days that happen throughout the year, but you're pricing as if everything happened perfectly every day. So you have to build that all into because you're still paying that guy the day that it rains probably, or you at least are, I'm not going to charge my customer necessarily for the time to drive from where I start my day to Collierville, which is an hour away. That's not being built into always onto my pricing. And so I think it's important to be looking through all the factors that go into price and work kind of backwards. Like, hey, in an ideal world, I would want to make X dollars or X dollars per job or whatever you wanted to say. And if that was to be the case, what would I have to do to make that happen? And so I think as you think through this, there's a lot of inefficiencies in the business that people don't think through when they're pricing. And I also think that like cost of making sure that your team is trained well now and in the future, and overstaffing for capacity, and all the things that go into growth that you have to prepare for before you're actually going to be super efficient there makes that somewhat naive to think through that every job's going to work out perfect. All my people come on time every time. We have everybody's staffed perfectly. Those inefficiencies cause some of my costing problems.
At what point would you start to jump into, revenue and pricing per item or per service line from the standpoint of trying to maximize things? My immediate thought there is loss leaders. Like I may Home Depot and Lowe's, those guys, they'll put lumber on sale for super cheap and then throw it in the back of the store. They'll throw things at the register that are higher margins or whatever it is. The kind of the strategy piece of it. If I am a restaurant and I have a menu of 100 things, at what point are you really digging into item 1 has better margins than item 2, or maybe even does it make sense to kill item 5 because of I'm not as profitable there? At what point do you get that granular when trying to look at overall profitability?
I'm going to use first your example of a restaurant, and then I'm going to use an example of a contractor. Those are two little bit different answers, right? A restaurant, I think it's about the simpler your menu is, the easier it is for you to produce. I think as far as pricing goes, I think you can be very strategic with price. I think through your ability to produce that plate in an efficient manner so that you can turn tables faster, I would be looking really quickly into true costing on day one, I want to have what I think is, what they call as, your ideal food cost. What your quantities are. This is what it should be costing me to produce this plate. And by doing that, I can then understand where I should be pushing. But I don't know if costing on a plate is as important as, creating the dining experience they want to have and making sure that you're selling all the things and appropriately suggesting the right getting a larger ticket price is probably more important because you already have that customer sitting in a table and they're already ordering stuff. How do I get them to, try a wine they haven't tried or have a dessert or make sure you have the experience that wants to elongate the meal so that they buy more things. If I'm a contractor though, I'm pricing every job day one exactly to the nickel because that's the only way I know if I'm profitable as I go to reprice the next job and the next job because those are almost one job by each learning how to price.
Yeah.
As I do it more and more, I might not have to look at each job at that point. But if I'm a contractor in the very beginning, I want to know exactly what's going into every job and making sure I am very clear what profitable looks like.
And contractor role is a little bit different. Even now, you see a lot more people going towards like a cost plus model where because costs are so outrageously changing.
Well, they're going all the board. And then you also got the problem with, hey, it rained today, so I got to pay my people today, but they didn't actually get anything done. I got one guy got sick, one guy got hurt. It's the inevitable of the law of everything doesn't work out perfectly in every job. So you have to make sure you price those things. And the cost plus is where most contractors are going. Actually.
Yeah. I think
on our world that we see.
I think that what you said earlier, a lot of people will set price and look at price as from the standpoint of everything goes perfectly. This is what my price is. And if I do that, whatever that job is 100 times a day, then I'm going to be profitable without factoring in not everything is always going to be perfect. And to the extent people do start to factor in, I know that things are going to be off a little bit. They probably underestimate how much downtime or how much outside variables or changes are going to happen that's going to influence.
Pricing of services in our world is very challenging in that there's a training and development cost that we have to make sure that we're anticipating training and developing our people so they continue to grow and develop and to handle more complex work and or do the work they're already doing more efficiently, all the changing rules that apply. You have the factor with regards to, hey, if the client were to report to everything to us perfectly every time we needed it, it's a very efficient job. But that's not what really happens. Clients get busy doing things besides accounting that are probably more important and impactful to them on that day, and therefore they're not as efficient as they should be. So our efficiencies are kind of not at our mercy; they're at our client's mercy, and that makes things really challenging for us. And we probably price too optimistically that everything's going to work out fine every time. Pricing is more art, I think, than science, but the more you are analyzing price, the better opportunity you have to make sure that you're not making the same mistakes over and over again. We constantly do what I call as a postmortem on, larger projects. I think that's something that a lot of contractors probably do too. After this job is done, what did we really make on it? Where did we go wrong with price? What did we miss? What did we not anticipate well? What could we have done better so that the next job gets better and better, and you get better at pricing every job as you go forward? I think that's the same with any business this way. It's like, hey, I know my dad worked retail for a long time, and they did do hey, we know that we'd sell lumber for no profit. They are intentionally doing that because they want you to buy the nails and the hammers and the T-square and the other things.
That new fancy belt that's just going to make all the difference in the world.
Correct. Yeah. And so they were really smart about it. They didn't make a lot of money on the paint, but they made everything on the brushes and the cups and all the things that go into selling the paint in their non-contractor world, right? In the home repair guy, the person that wants to do their own self-repair, that was a different model in Home Depot. And they also have a contractor model, which was, hey, we're going to sell you in bulk, and we're going to make a little bit on all the things, but you're not going to overpay on all the other stuff that you never buy from us. And so they were really smart about pricing that way because they had to know who their different customers were, just like we have to know who our customer is. And if you're a pool contractor, that's good at your job, give me a call. This is sponsored by. No, but like if you're building a pool and you know that you always do 30 pools a year, that's one thing. If you do 500 pools a year, that's a different thing. So how you price and effectively show the value for those 30 people that buy pools that are more expensive than the 500 that are, I'll say, bare bones pools, and you just crank them out. You're learning your customer and what drives value to them, and then that allows you to really impact price.
Yeah. So this conversation went a little bit different than maybe what I expected from the beginning. I thought we were going to spend a lot of time talking about on the expense side, but I think it's really, I think where that ended up going was really good, because the reality is, I know in my experience, it's easy to jump into the weeds on the expense side. What am I spending money on? Where's my money going? And maybe a little bit harder, maybe more challenging to jump in on the revenue side to say, can I charge more? Am I charging appropriately? Where am I not creating value and could adjust? There's a little bit harder work there. And it's important to not be afraid of, if I maybe get a little more aggressive in my pricing, does that mean my entire business is going to collapse because people are going to stop buying from me? Probably not. And having a little bit of confidence in what we're doing.
I'll say in the beginning when we first started the firm, I know that we ran into a lot of clients at that point that always felt they had to be the cheapest in town, or they had to be, they would look at their competitors for pricing and kind of figure out the price. You're creating value with your business uniquely to you that impacts your ability to be profitable. When I think of my margins in our work, we drive margins in reverse. I want to make X. So in order to make X with the best people we can get, and we pay them really, really well, in order to do that, we have to price our services appropriately, and therefore we'll be profitable. It doesn't have to be, well, I have to pay my person the cheapest, and I have to make sure they're doing it the fastest. I have to provide the right value to my customer. So same kind of logic.
And there are kind of the flip side of that. There are some businesses out there that do have high volume, low margin models where it's not maybe not on Amazon level, but I do need to sell 1,000 widgets in order to reach my financial goals. And those types of businesses, if you're running that model, you have to be very, very granular on every penny that goes out the door. Otherwise, you may be losing money when you sell that widget.
You have to remember what your model is.
Yeah.
So if I am a very low margin, high volume business, I have to make sure that I am remembering who I am as I'm pricing my product, but also how I'm staffing and how I have to analyze my numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think about this whole entire conversation, if you know the meme of like there's a machine that's broken down and the mechanic is there and they're all gathered around, and he takes the hammer, hits the piece of the machine to get it to working, and he's like, here's your bill for $10,000. Like, all you did was hit the hammer in a spot. It's like, yeah, it was $1 to hit the hammer, and it was $9,999 to know where to hit the hammer.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we undervalue and underprice our knowledge and expertise. And honestly, all of the life history that brought us to the point where we actually have the ability to deliver with that knowledge and expertise. And all of those things should be considered whenever we're setting price, because ultimately the very starting point of profitability is going to be is somebody willing to pay me money, and at what level of money are they willing to pay me? So good conversation. Matt, I appreciate your time. And for you guys listening, thank you for joining us. We're always excited to have a conversation with you guys, and reach out to us if you have questions. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. And so we'll see you next time on the One Step Better podcast. Thanks for listening to the One Step Better podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you would take some time to rate us 5 stars on your podcast player of choice, and make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you never miss out on another episode. Thanks, and have a great day.